Well, we continue with the Corporate Governance Conference. Good afternoon to those of you who are here in Madrid, in the Madrid campus of the school. Good morning to those of you in the Americas. There are hundreds of you connected online through the conference in North America, South America. And good evening. We're very sorry for those of you located in Asia who are following this conference, and it's already a bit late for some of you, but I just want to give you again a very warm welcome to the conference and also to this final session today on October the 4th. During the day, we have been able to listen to outstanding speakers, their reflections and their research on activist shareholders and how boards of directors can work in understanding better the behavior of activist shareholders and how to engage them and how to think about the way to listen to their views, to their proposals, sometimes how to also withstand their, I would say, strong pressure to do some changes that perhaps the board of directors may not want to carry out. So we see here, and I think the first session on activist investors, I think it's a very clear, I would say, a litmus test of the quality of a board of directors to really think about strategy, to really think about the long-term orientation of the company, and also, I would say, the ability of the board of directors to be in the driving seat of the company. The second session, we had, I think, a very interesting discussion between Ben Holmstrom and Sophie Elias on the role of the board of directors in technology transformation, in digital transformation, the role of platforms, the role of data, the implications of the value of data today for the companies that are actually the intermediating of the many industries. I think it's also a very important reflection, but at the same time, something that the board should not only monitor, but also have probably a more active role working with the top management team. Finally, we had, I think, a fantastic session on sustainability with a lot of empirical data presented by Yanis Ionao, who actually has done an outstanding job in this area of sustainability. At the same time, I think that one of the key questions around sustainability is not so much whether we are meeting some ESG targets and goals, which is something important. It's not only about, well, we're environmentally very conscious and we want to do more. I think a very important issue and also a key challenge for boards of directors is how the board of directors, together with the top management team, integrate those long-term sustainability or ESG goals into the main strategy and business model of the company. So we see three different challenges, complex challenges, that actually highlight that the role of boards of directors is truly complex. It's not just about understanding the issues, which is a very important dimension. It's not just about working with the top management team, which is also a very important dimension. Somehow, those scholars following this discussion in person or online know that for almost 40 years, agency theory has been the dominant paradigm in understanding boards of directors, and the interpretation of shareholders as principals and the board of directors as agents of those principles is the dominant model through which we try to understand, or many scholars have been trying to understand, the world of boards of directors. And we see that this framework is clearly insufficient because the role of boards of directors is truly complex. We have here today in this panel three CEOs, board members who have many years of experience in dealing with working with boards of directors, working also as senior executives with boards of directors, and having deep discussions with investors as well. And they are going to bring to this discussion also the perspective of boards in the real world. And certainly what scholars actually try to do is very relevant, but understanding very well the real world of boards of directors and the pressure and the feelings that they have and how they work as a human group is truly, truly important. So this discussion is, I would say, tries to be the capstone of this first day, not because it's above the other sessions, but because it tries to summarize some of the discussions that we had in this first day of the conference. Let me introduce the three speakers we feel so privileged to have among us. First, we have Baroness Denise Kingsmill. Denise is online. Thank you very much, Denise, for being with us today. She is based in London. She couldn't travel and come to Madrid, but we are delighted to have Denise among us. Denise is a lawyer with many years of experience as a partner in a top law firm in the UK. She was also the chairperson, deputy chairperson of the Competition Authority in the UK for many years. She was made peer of the House of Lords back in 2006. So she serves in the House of Lords and is the chairperson of the Economics Committee. And she's also a very active board member in a number of international companies. And I asked her to speak today from her many years of experience as a board director, and very especially to think about how a company she serves on the board, Inditex, is thinking about sustainability and digital transformation, which is a very, I would say, very topical theme today for all of us. Thank you very much, Denise, for being with us. I have here also Risto. Siilasmaa. Risto is a well-known Finnish entrepreneur who founded one of the largest software companies in Scandinavian countries related with software security, cyber security. In the year 2008, he joined the board of Nokia as a board member, and in 2012 was appointed chairman of the board of directors of Nokia. He was chairman of the board till 2020, so very recently he left that position. And so you can think about how experienced he is in terms of corporate transformation, facing digital change, but also many other disruptive changes around technology and telecoms. Risto is also a member of the international board of the school. He's now a venture capitalist. He's investing in lots of high-tech companies and serves on the boards of some of those companies. So he has many years of experience, both as a CEO, as a senior executive, and also as a board member. Risto, thank you very much for being with us today. We also have here the privilege of counting on Tobías Martínez. Tobías is the Chief Executive Officer of Cellnex. Most of you know or have heard about Cellnex. Cellnex is the largest telecommunication infrastructure management in Europe. They essentially manage today about 130,000 towers of telecommunications around Europe. They offer services to the major telecommunications companies in Europe. They have become a very important, I would say, player in the whole telecommunications industry value chain. Very important because they not only keep the telecoms operators updated in terms of technology, they invest for them, they also make sure that the quality of the services that they get, especially with the introduction of 5G across Europe, throughout the world, is, I would say, carried out smoothly so that the final consumers, all of us, actually can have, an outstanding service. And you can imagine also the complexity of this operation. But I would say more important, Cellnex is also a very interesting company because it was born back in 2015. It was a spin-off of Abertis. Abertis had a business unit named Abertis Telecom, focused on telecommunications, but was a very small company. And through I would say, not only the very good execution, but the very good design of strategy that Tobías and his team back in 2014, 2015, the company actually grew from almost zero, from scratch. Now it's the fourth largest company market cap in Spain. It's one of the largest players in the telecoms industry in Europe, and it has had an incredible performance, both in terms of market penetration, in terms of financial performance. So it's, I think, also a very interesting company, and very interesting from the perspective of how Tobías, as the CEO of the company, and the board of directors of the company have thought about long-term strategy, growth, the diversity of shareholders that actually they have been gathering over the years. So very interesting insights. So we have three outstanding speakers. We have Denise, Risto, and Tobías. Unfortunately, Rafael Del Pino was going to be with us today, but it had an unexpected meeting. He's not in Spain today, so he couldn't join us either through Zoom. So we're missing him, but we have a fantastic panel. So I would like to ask Denise, Risto, and Tobías to start with your own thoughts on how boards of directors can be more effective in dealing with strategy and working with the CEO and the top management team on long-term strategy issues. I would like to start with Denise. Denise, can you hear us well?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Denise, thank you for being with us.
I'm delighted. I just regret that I haven't been able to be with you in Spain. And indeed, it sounds as if you've had a wonderful program all day. And I'm very sad that I haven't been able to be with you.
Very good. Denise, would you like to start with your own reflections on the role of boards of directors in thinking about strategy in the long-term orientation of the company, with the experience that you have in different boards of international companies?
Yes, I've been on the board of E.ON in Germany, Telecom Italia in Italy, IAG in London and in Madrid. It's and enormous numbers of others as well. I've been a non-executive director for a long time. I'm a lawyer and a parliamentarian, so I bring not just the corporate experience of boards, but also a legal perspective. And I think what is also very important in thinking about these things is a political and reporting perspective as well. I think what we have to understand, however, is that it is the executives who are the people who are fundamentally responsible for the direction of the company. I think the board of directors is there to not to set the strategy, but to ensure that a sustainable strategy is set, and to question and to develop it, or enable it to be developed, and to ensure that it is consistent with that there is a strategy which is consistent with the long-term, I was going to say survival, but that you know what I mean, the long-term sustainability of the business. Sustainability has more than one meaning. Of course, there are issues around environment and ESG, and I personally am not very keen on these acronyms. I mean, we've had CSR and we've had ESG and so on. I think they are useful, but sometimes an acronym will actually disguise the true meaning of what is meant and what is undertaken. And so I think the thing that an individual director has to do is to ensure that the right people are in office, that they have a clear understanding of sustainability, in particular in relation to their business. sustainability means something quite different in a telecoms company than it does in a fashion business like Inditex, or like a fintech like Monzo, of which I was chairman until very recently, as well. There are the objectives of the company are clear, but where the board of director comes in is ensuring that they are compatible with the overall aim of the company, which is to look after its shareholders and to look after other stakeholders and to ensure that the business of the company does well. There are many ways you can do this. Obviously, there's the usual system is to set out these objectives and the strategy in the annual report, but that's a very simple way of doing it. At Inditex, I'm the chair of the Sustainability Committee. We have recently established a separate board committee in the company, of which I am the chairman, and of which there are other non-executives who are members of that board. Inditex has always been committed to sustainable goals, but in order to enhance that commitment, a separate and board committee has been established. We have one board meeting a year, which is exclusively committed to sustainability issues, but we speak at every board meeting in relation to, I report to the board the whole board at every board meeting on sustainability issues. And I do so after having had many conversations with the executives. There are over 200 people working in the sustainability department of Inditex. It's a very large department, and it has many different aspects to it. Obviously, sustainability is a very important issue in the fashion industry. It is one of those areas which the industry as a whole has been criticized for in the past. It has many manifestations, whether it is the use of water, whether it's the use of energy, whether it's the human rights element of who are producing the goods, the way in which cotton is grown. So many fashion industry, so much of the fashion product is made out of cotton. There are many aspects to what constitutes sustainability. And what I think is really important to keep emphasizing all the time when you think about sustainability is ultimately you have to have a high-performing company. You have to have a high-performing company that at the end of the day, one which meets the needs of its shareholders, meets the needs of its people, and meets the needs of, above all else, the consumer who's going to buy the goods, because they're the ones that are going to ensure the long-term sustainability in an economic sense of the company. So what you have to do is you have to recognize the different requirements of each of the stakeholders and find out and work out the way in which you can communicate with them better and best. In the case of the fashion industry, we're very influenced by the NGOs because they're the ones who have particular concerns. They're the ones who have done their own research as well. And we work closely with a number of NGOs to ensure that we are meeting the standards that are necessary in our industry. There is also, of course, the regulations, the political aspect of it, the regulations which are clear and which you have to meet, and which you have to meet with emphasis and energy, because they're not just there as sort of guidelines. They are there to ensure that we are actually we're operating to standards which are universal across our markets. And so having a wide understanding of the different regulations in the markets in which we operate, and we do operate in a large number of it. We are, in fact, the biggest fashion retailer in the world. So we do need to be very acutely aware of the different environments, the political and political environment and legal environments in which we're working, and that's a very important part of sustainability as well. There are, of course, conflicts at times, conflicts which arise because issues which one country might think is the way it should be is not always what another country might be. But there are ways and means of negotiating these things, and it's very much part of the role of a board to assist, support, encourage, and to some extent direct, but that's not the principal role in my view. And I'm sure that the CEO that you have on your panel will agree with me on this, that our role is to ensure that strategy is set, ensure that it's robust, ensure that it meets the needs of the company itself, ensure that it's sustainable, and ensure that it is well thought out of and appropriate for all the markets and all the challenges which the company faces. Now, I think that's enough from me for the moment. I'd be very interested to hear what my fellow speakers have to say, because they come from different positions within corporate board structures. And I'm sure they've got a perspective which I find very useful and helpful in what I do.
Denise, thank you very much for your very insightful reflections. Tobías, it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. No doubt that strategy is one of the main duties of the board. So when we talk about the role should be active. But let me go more in depth. When we talk about active, what does it mean? Active, in my understanding, also as a CEO, as an executive board member, means to interact with the senior management, with the company. Why? Because company, it's into the company every day, yeah, and facing with all of the topics. So also senior management should fit the board, just to be sure that the interaction happens, and maybe setting, as a CEO, also setting an iterative process. I mean, being sure that you are in the right path and with the right alignment with the board. So I think board should not wait just in a passive understanding on tell me what's about the strategy. If we look back, companies, maybe, I don't know how many years ago, we set a strategic plan, and we were devoting a lot of time maybe to set a wonderful strategic plan. After that, I think we did understand that we should pay more attention on the implementation on the strategy, rather than to be extremely academics on the fantastic writing a fantastic strategic plan. And today, I think we are in a different stage. It's not just about execution, it's the interaction in a daily, maybe not in a daily basis, but not once a year in a strategic meeting. It's always interacting with the management, with the board, in order to be sure that we are not missing something. We are identifying the risk, or having the opportunity to grow, because it's about growth strategy. It's not just a defensive, which is part of the strategy, but it seems that today strategy means how to be protected in front of the risk, which is very important. But also, I think it's very important to understand if the future evolution of the context is giving us the opportunity for growth. Just to give you examples on the disruptive technologies or digital platforms, the impact on, let me say, the legacy business we know very well. I do not want to enter in specific sectors, but just technology, it's one of the key elements on how to understand the impact, but also ESG, as we were seeing this afternoon, the composition of the shareholders base, let me say, at least in Europe, we were not familiar with such kind of different kind of shareholders. And for listed companies, it's very important to understand what is happening every day, if I may say every day. But it's not enough to set a wonderful strategy. It's not enough to follow up the evolution with a great map of indicators on the achievement on the strategy. Is not enough. I'm not telling you that this is not important. But on top of that, we have to be more agile in order to fine-tune or to be ready to change the direction or to adapt the company extremely fast. Otherwise, they do. Others, and not just maybe let me say, the former competitors, maybe your customers, maybe your suppliers, or maybe new entrants in the market. And the complexity of the context, uncertain context, I cannot be more in agreement with such a sentence. In my view, in a nutshell, in uncertain context, it's a must, the interaction between board, management board, and being sure that we have an alignment of the strategy, let me say, every day and not once a year, which is maybe mandatory, but is not enough today. And this is my view on the role of the board working as a team, as a part of the executive management, and the executive management trust on the board. You know what I mean, trust, transparency, and maybe raising some doubts, because who knows? We do not have the crystal ball at the end of the day, but if we align the objectives, if we understand the complexity, maybe we understand the disagreement, because why not to disagree at a certain point of time, but at the end of the day having, I think, the ability to reach the agreement on the principles and to establish a clear path. You are not creating at least a mess internally speaking and externally. So I think the complexity, it's becoming higher and higher. The volatility, the number of variables are also becoming higher, and therefore I think no one have the crystal ball, and being in a clear alignment, it's a must.
Thank you very much, Tobías, because you are speaking also from the experience of a company that back in 2015, just 6 years ago, lots of people thought or look at Cellnex through some skeptical mindsets. Okay, I think you've been able to deliver a lot of value, creating a lot of value, not just for shareholders, for many stakeholders, through this very careful strategy, very careful execution. So I think it's a fantastic reference, a fantastic example to take into account. Let's move to Risto. Risto, I mean, you have many years of experience, many years as an entrepreneur, CEO, chairman of a very large company, going through a very important corporate transformation process. Could you share with us your reflections on strategy, what board members should have in mind when they think about their companies and their strategies?
Sure, thank you. I just calculated that I have 20 years as CEO and 40 years as chairman under my belt, and I still don't have the answer to these questions. I have some answers, but not the answer. But let me start with a couple of reflections on what I have heard today. First of all, as my main role today is to work with growth companies and basically trying to create new unicorns and decacorns into Europe. Do you know how entrepreneurs think about corporate governance? For them, the definition of corporate governance is that as a private company CEO, they spend their time on things that add value to the company. And then corporate governance is what they are forced to do when they become public.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a positive term for them. And strategy is not corporate governance for them at all. They don't think of it that way. So I think we need to rebrand corporate governance. And it doesn't help that institutional investors actually support the negative definition of corporate governance, in the sense that as chairman and CEO, I sometimes have to deal with the corporate governance teams from large institutional investors. And these are not the fund managers. These are not the ones who make the choices on where to invest and why. They don't know the company, they don't know the strategy of the company, they don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about corporate governance, i.e. compensation, ESG topics. They don't talk about strategy. If they have decided that option plans are bad, there's no way you can convince them that in our case, actually for these and these reasons, an option plan makes sense. They don't have the authority to reverse that decision that has been made earlier, that for us, all option plans are bad. So I think we should rethink about corporate governance and what it means and make it more attractive. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that researchers and practitioners in management science don't really work together, and I think that's a very detrimental fact. If we take almost any other field, the medical researchers write research that doctors actually read, and it can be hugely valuable to them. But for CEOs, they don't read management science journals. Almost none of them do. And the ones who try, they don't understand what's written in them. The language is completely different. And that's not absolutely necessary. I'd really hope to have more CEOs excited about the thoughts, the valuable thoughts that management science researchers come up with. But I'd also like to see management science researchers write to CEOs. So when I read in a paper about the diseconomics of time compression, this is not the terminology that you hear in the boardroom. No CEO tells the board that because of diseconomics of time compression, we have to do A, B, and C. So let's try to change that, we here in this room, because I think there's so much we could give to each other. And then about the strategy and the board, I think we have a sort of a challenge with continuation in boards. There's just too much of continuation. When a new board member comes in, there are 11 existing board members, and they have gotten used to working in a particular way, and the newcomer cannot really change things, and rarely can they even challenge things. I think we should stop to think about the board principles in each board. So what are our principles? What do we really stand for? What are the important ways we want to do our job? And let's say, for example, many boards might say that we want to be data-driven. So we want to have data, facts, and we make our decisions based on those. So then, why don't we gather statistics on how many hours have we spent on various topics over the last year as a board? Many boards do this, but not nearly all. And the results might surprise us. How many years did we spend on competition? How many, not years, but how many hours did we spend on competition? How many hours on strategy? How many hours on technology? how many hours on different functions, marketing, HR, talent, and then the various subclasses of corporate governance. And then we could think about, is this the right split? Thinking about our environment, the competition, the dynamics of the industry. Would we like to change it in some way? When I became chairman of Nokia in 2012, it happened to be a very, very difficult time. Nokia had been taken a little bit by surprise by the touch devices from Apple, and then Android came to the market. And Nokia concluded in 2011 that it doesn't have a software platform that would be competitive against the iOS and Android. And then it, as a result, teamed up with Microsoft and took the Microsoft's Windows Phone platform as the main smartphone platform. And in 2012, in June, when I had started as chairman in May, Microsoft announced that they want to become a devices and services company. And so far, they had always been a software company, a services company. For the first time ever, they wanted to become a devices company. So for us in the Nokia board, this was a scary thought. What if they become our competitor? What if they launch their own smartphones, now that we have an exclusive relationship with them that we can't get out of? And then our main supplier becomes our competitor. So one way to start a strategic debate between the board and the management team is to say that, okay, what if this would happen? How would we know in advance? What data could tell us that they are actually moving down this path? How can we act to prevent it right now? Not tomorrow, but today. Or if they move down this path, how can we mitigate the worst consequences? What would happen if they do this? How would we react? And what we did, we established actually 2 subcommittees for the board. One was for the Microsoft Dynamics. We call that the Industry Dynamics Committee. And we focused on what could Microsoft do and how would we know in advance and what would our reaction be. And that was a wonderful experience with the management team. But of course, they did all the work. We just added new questions. And this kind of a scenario planning was really, really helpful to engage the board and the management team on a joint project. We had a number of other scenarios as well. And for one of those other scenarios, we also had a subcommittee that was for the infrastructure, telecom infrastructure market. But the relationship between the management and the board, I fully agree with Tobías on it having to be based on trust. And how do you establish trust? You explain how you will operate, and then you will walk the talk. And you will work together, you spend time together. If you don't spend time together, you will not establish trust. So back then in 2012, we shifted the board agenda towards these strategic issues, added more time there, and overall board hours, we just immediately added 30% more hours onto the board meetings, because the company was in such dire straits that we felt that was necessary. And then later on, a couple of years later, we took some hours away. We ended up having 60 board meetings within 12 months. That was of course because of the M&A that we went through, which always creates additional board meetings. But many of them were pre-planned. So maybe here are some beginning thoughts.
Very good. Risto, thank you very much for your very insightful reflections and experiences. I think that a common thread, we try to somehow find some common ground. What Denise, Tobías, and now Risto just said, I think that there are a couple of things that I think very relevant, both for the practice of boards of directors but also for academic research, and which is the reality that the interaction between the board and the top management team is indispensable to help the board develop, define, work, and eventually help the top management implement a strategy. Okay, so this collaboration between the board and the top management team. And then there is the issue of trust and how you generate trust. And I think that Risto's reflections, I think, are very, very important, because they take us to the fact that the board of directors, together with the top management team, are a human reality. I mean, it's a group of people who actually have to work together, if possible, as a one team, trying to take the company to the next level. Okay, and this is not something that happens spontaneously. So I would like to ask, perhaps drawing from the final comment made by Risto, I would like to ask Denise and Tobías, what's your experience in the boards that you have served now or in the past on developing this trust between the board and the top management team, and also this very important issue of the agenda of the board as a driver of strategy? Okay, Risto mentioned, the amount of time that the board is allocating to some issues. What's your experience, Denise? Can you share with us both how to build this relationship of trust, based on trust, and also the time allocation to some specific issues in the agenda of the board?
Yes, well, I was very interested to hear that, the Nokia story. There's nothing like crisis to draw a board together. Well, it can, in some circumstances, really cause tremendous splits. But in a good board, in a board that's prepared to face the crisis together and work as a team, it is something which is itself something which builds trust. Because when you've been through, when you've been through difficulties together, then it really works. I remember at IAG at the early days when British Airways and Iberia were merging, there were two very different teams of board directors on that board, people who had completely different viewpoints as to what corporate governance meant in the context of a Spanish company and one in the context of a UK company. But they were brought together. There was a crisis in the sense of making this merger work, bringing it together, and over time, with that crisis meant that there was a great increase in trust and liking. I mean, people actually, they liked each other and they got on together, and we had, dinners and lunches together, and so worked much better together than we might otherwise have done as strangers together. But that was quite an interesting thing. I absolutely agree with the idea that strategy is an evolving issue. I do think it is, and I think I use the word evolving quite importantly, but not changing, evolving. You have to develop it at each single board meeting. It has to be something which grows, but there has to be, in my opinion, and I don't think this is a once a year situation, there has to be a time when you can focus exclusively on strategy. There are lots of other things going on in the running of a business, lots of other things which a board has to take account of, and to be able to spend some time exclusively on strategy, it is something you'll be dealing with at every single board meeting, but to be able to spend some significant time on that issue alone is very, very useful. And to be doing it off-site as well, not necessarily in the traditional boardroom, but somewhere where you can relax together, be together, talk constructively and well together. I think that's a very useful operation.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Denise. I would like to ask Tobías, about this relationship between the top management team and the board and how you actually build, and you've done it, I think, very successfully. And also on the issue of the agenda of the board and how you actually manage, especially when you have so many, in your case, so many opportunities for growth, potential opportunities, how you put some strategic priorities here so that everybody, as you said before, is aligned on the main goals of the company.
Well, it's again coming back to the interaction. It's key, but just to maybe to remind that we have had the COVID, and interaction just through the screen is not the same. Let me put it that way. So on top of that, it's important to meet again in person because it's not the same. Trust is about individuals. It's about behaviors. It's about the tone. In the first session, I learned about the tone of the activist, which is very smart. It's about tone. It depends. If you are questioning as a teacher or teaching you, we do not like it very much. But if you feel that the tone is constructive, challenging, raising smart questions, but challenging, but with a very good tone, everyone is open to consider and to create such kind of atmosphere of trust. And the technicality of the agenda, I think it's very important to set the full year planning on the different structures of the agenda. You can identify for sure some common items in every board meeting, but you have to be sure that you are covering the entire 360 degrees view of the company in the whole year, at least. So we are seeing that the ESG are becoming more and more relevant, not important, but relevant for the investors, analysts, stakeholders. Then we have to include and we have to modify, we have to adjust, we have to accommodate the agenda also on this kind of topics. So it's a learning curve as well for the board members and also executive members. And I think if we are humble at the end in order to maybe to be transparent and to share with the rest of the board members that maybe we need the others in terms of sharing with a very good tone, then it's easier to reach the objective. But the agenda for sure should be set with the chairman of the board, of course, but having interaction also with the chairperson of the committees, and also including comments that maybe you are collecting from other board members. So you have to be sensitive in a way. You have to be sensitive. But it's about individuals. And again, at least in our experience in the last 18 months, has been difficult to interact just through the platforms, which is not the same.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tobías, for these very wise reflections. Before starting the conversation with you all, both those of you who are on campus and those of you who are online, I would like to ask another question to Risto on your experiences. I mean, you have led a very successful corporate transformation process at Nokia, which is not exactly, I mean, strategy or strategy implementation is more than that, because it's actually having not only a point of view of where you want to go, but also how you're going to transform actually the company in a much deeper way. Could you please share with us some major, pillars or reflections of the process you went through at Nokia as chairman of the board, and the role of the board when a company actually needs quick change because there is a relevant crisis happening around you?
Yeah, sometimes there's a crisis that brings people together, like Denise said earlier. And to bring people together, you really have to spend time together as well. If you're isolated, then typically disagreements emerge. So we had a really tough situation mentally, in the sense that Nokia had been one of the most valuable companies in the world and the poster child of technology. And then suddenly we were in a situation where our revenues were dropping by 25–30% per year. We were deeply in the red. Our share price was so low that, and many institutional investors felt so negatively about it, that they were completely dropping it off from the list of shares that they even looked at as a possibility to invest in the future. We had constant layoffs. We laid off probably altogether 80,000 people in just a few years. And the whole environment was very negative. There was just bad news all the time. So how do you bring the team together so that it feels energized and united and has faith for the future? I think this scenario planning was the key tool for us. So you identify the worst possible outcomes, but also the best possible outcomes. The worst are important in the sense that it sort of takes fear away. When you acknowledge what could happen, and then you plan what can you do to prevent that from happening, or if it still happens, how do you react? People feel that as they can take action right away, they control their own future. The scariest thing is if you're a passenger, but if you are in the driver's seat, even if the wheel doesn't turn that much, you feel that you have some degree of control. And then, of course, the best scenarios, those are the ones that you want to happen, so you put most of your efforts there, but not exclusively. You spend some effort on the worst scenarios to prevent them from happening, and at least to identify the track that you are taking as early as possible if the company will be heading towards those. So we ended up selling the mobile phones business to Microsoft, and the other alternative might well have been the disappearance of the whole company. So we got a good deal. Unfortunately, it didn't work well for Microsoft, which discontinued the business sometime later. But that was a very intense experience that really brought the management team and the board together. And I really felt that was one of the best times of my sort of CEO/chairman history, because of the intensity of it and because of the united feeling we had as a team.
Thank you, Risto, and congratulations on the great job that you did steering the company through more stable waters for the...
And when you leave from a really low situation, it's easy to get great multiples. So we achieved 20x in enterprise value in just a few years, which is more about the starting point than how high we ended up.
Well, congratulations, Risto. Well, I don't know if there is. I'm sure that there are questions here. Who wants to start by asking a question to? Yes.
Hi. So Risto, I really enjoyed your comments about research and practice, as well as why private firms are not all that excited about the topic of governance. And I fully agree with you, what you mentioned, which might be one of the reasons we are getting fewer and fewer publicly traded companies. But the question I have is that in the case of Nokia, we had what you would call a burning platform, and which forced the board to sort of get involved in major strategic decisions, which were ultimately going to allow for the survival of the company. So do you have any words of advice for companies that are not on a burning platform and what boards can do to be more engaged on the issue of strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure my colleagues would have some valuable ideas on that. But if I will start, I believe we are heading towards very complex times. And my definition of complexity here is that it's the combination of things getting more complicated, and that's largely a technology issue. They are getting more unpredictable, so surprises are becoming more common, and speed is increasing. So the combination of unpredictability, complicatedness, and speed create a very difficult environment. Bengt spoke earlier about the importance of platforms, platform companies and digital platforms, and explained that 8 out of the 10 most valuable companies are all platform companies in the world at the moment. And the challenge for traditional businesses or non-tech businesses is that it's not enough to know your own business. It's not that you train your board and your management team in, let's say, in the downstream oil industry. Because you need to have them know enough about digital technology as well, because the surprise might come from that direction.
Yeah.
And maybe it comes from a very different direction, not even from digitalization. So how do you prepare for that? Of course, diversity helps. You need to have your ears open to contrarian thoughts from all sources, and researchers could be a valuable source for that, if the dialogue would be closer than it is. And the contrariness of, or the acceptability of contrarian ideas and thoughts is a big cultural factor in being awakened to what could happen, what could come from the left field, and it needs to be encouraged.
Thank you, Risto. We take a question coming from one of the online participants. Actually, he's Andrew Hill from the Financial Times. He has a question for the 3 members of the panel, and I just read Andrew's question. We have heard a lot about the interaction between the management and the board of directors in setting strategy. What is the role of open strategy? By open strategy, I mean involving other stakeholders, such as staff members, customers, suppliers, and so on, in helping to set the course of the company. Have any of you, any of the panelists, used open strategy approaches or just taking into account views of other stakeholders? You want to start, Tobías?
Well, maybe let me say a bit disruptive on that. I think the ownership has to be clear. This is about a duty. It's not an open responsibility. It's a board duty, it's a CEO and management duty. You have to take into consideration, of course, shareholders, investors, analysts, stakeholders, whatever. But the duty has to be clear, because this is a company, it's not a club. When you are asking for the agreement of the memberships, I think you have to be very clear on the accountability. And strategy, let me say, it's a very attractive subject in order to talk about, to discuss, and finally nothing happens. And again, it's about duty, accountability, because you have to deliver quarterly, you have to disclose the information to the markets, you have to attract new investors, you have to define new goals, and you have the accountability. If you do not perform well, you have to be fired. And we take such responsibility, so we are accountable for this. But very sorry about this concept of open strategy. If open strategy means that we have to integrate more and more stakeholders' opinion, shareholders, of course, then fully agree. But I think we have to be prudent. We have to manage carefully the principles behind of such, maybe, I'm very sorry, naive understanding of open strategy.
Thank you, Tobías. Risto, any reflection on this?
I disagree with that quite strongly.
Yes, Denise.
I just disagree with that quite strongly. I think that the formation of strategy is not something which takes place simply within the boardroom at all. I think you do have to be very aware of what your people are thinking for a start, because otherwise you're not going to get a strategy which is acceptable. You have to ensure that this is something which the people who work for you understand and that they accept and think works. Certainly in a number of industries as well, and particularly in the fashion industry at the present moment, you have to take account of what the NGOs are thinking. They're powerful influences, and they often have a point of view which is correct and which you need to take account of and that you need to incorporate into your strategy. And it would be foolish not to think in terms of opening up your sense of your strategic direction to those sort of influences. I think also there is hard law and soft law. You have to take account of the legal environment and the political environment in which you're operating, because if you don't, you will come up hard against huge difficulties as far as your strategy is concerned. I'll never forget, and I go back to the Nokia situation when there was where nuclear power was banned in Germany, and E.ON had 3 billion knocked off their bottom line overnight. Again, they have to take account of it. You have to alter and change your direction of your strategy, and you have to be able to take account of what those external factors are. I agree in the sense that ultimate accountability of taking the right decisions under stress and in difficulties lies with the board, and that includes all the directors as well as the management. But in formulating your strategy, you have to take account of all of these viewpoints, and you have to be responsible to some of those stakeholders to ensure that you do have a sustainable business.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you very much. Risto, your reflections on this issue?
Just a couple additions, because I agree strongly with both of you. And I think we are experiencing this strategy elephant situation once again, where one of us holds the elephant's left back foot in a dark room and other one is holding the trunk, and we're trying to describe the animal to each other. It just feels very different. And if there's one thing that we can be sure of, is that strategy formulation is an iterative process. So it requires us to have lots of discussions, lots of stakeholders, and every time we learn something new, that will maybe have us shift the course a little bit. Sometimes it may have us recalculate a completely new course. So this idea of living strategy is definitely there. And then on the open strategy, again, it's a bit of a definition issue. If we talk about the formulation of the core objectives, that's not necessarily a topic that we separately bring up with, let's say, suppliers. We will ask them their opinion on a lot of things, and those may influence our core objective setting. But then when we talk about the actions, how do we move forward with towards the chosen objectives, those are definitely things we ask our partners for their opinions and their support and help. And they may have much better ideas for us to implement this strategy than we have come up with ourselves. So it's a question of what part of the strategy elephant we are talking about.
Very good. If I may, just an additional comment. especially when companies and boards of directors use methodologies to think about strategies such as scenario planning, for instance, the need to involve in that process the views of obviously your own people and lots of people in your own company who actually know a lot about customers, about markets, about operations, about managing the value chain are very relevant. But also, I think as both of you said, and Denise put it in another context, I think taking into account the views of suppliers or key strategic partners or some specific customers that actually need to, this is truly indispensable. So I do think that, going back to Andrew's question, I think that whatever the name, okay, it could be open strategy or strategy by involving, the key players along the, your constituencies, your major stakeholders. I think good companies that do good strategy at the board level and top management team need to take those dimensions truly into account. So we have a question here in the audience.
KPMG. Yes, first of all, congratulations for this interesting panel. Thank you, Denise, Tobías, and Risto for your opinions, and also Jordi. And I want to make a reflection regarding something that Risto mentioned at the beginning of his first participation, was when you mentioned the rebranding of the corporate governance, and also about how some companies could think about corporate governance as a cost rather than something benefit, and in particular the entrepreneurship. So I think that okay, there are many examples of how a bad governance has developed in a bad situation, and also on bankruptcies and so on. So I think that it's important that in a conference like this, I mean, we put in, I mean, we put the benefits of this good corporate governance for the companies themselves. So just make a comment about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're again talking about the same thing with different names. For the entrepreneur, for example, good leadership needs to be at the core of what they aspire to do. And when we talk about good corporate governance, we also talk about good leadership. We just have a different framework for it, which includes then a number of other things. But what I meant with my comment is largely that I think we need to be more excited about corporate governance, and we need to be able to tie it more strongly into the goals of the companies, instead of thinking of it as a separate thing, which it still, unfortunately, sometimes is considered to be. And as I said, for example, I'd like the large institutional investors to have the fund managers join the corporate governance sessions with the portfolio companies. I think it's a completely wrong message to delegate that to the corporate governance department, which is not held in high esteem inside these institutional investors either.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question here in the auditorium? Okay, we have a question here. Domingo.
Hello, just one question. We were talking about corporate governance, and from a practical point of view, I many times see that all this superstructure created around the corporate governance is probably addressed to control the executive team, just to take risks, to go forward. So now we are in a moment where transformation is there, and I think we have to take risk, and we have to move forward. So I would like to share with you the impression that, how do you think about, is our current corporate governance ready to allow the boards to take the risks? Or do you see more like a handicap for the CEO or for the executive team to take the necessary risk to foster and to make the company grow?
No, well, I think as a listed companies, transparency, control is a must. I mean, it's part of the part of the rules of the game. I mean, I think it's also worth to also to underline that this is also a duty of the board. So the duty, one of the duties of the board is the supervising, to take control of the management in the good sense of control. Obviously, it's again, it's about trust, it's about positive challenging, smart challenging, if I may say, constructive. And at least from my point of view, it's part of the game, and it's positive. I think it's a must.
Thank you, Tobías. It's very unfortunate, but we are actually running out of time. I would like to ask just a final question, with brief question and also brief answers from the three panelists on the major concerns or most important themes that they think that should be on the board of directors' agenda in the next 5 years. Denise, would you like to start? Which are the 2-3 major themes that you think boards should tackle over the next few years?
I think they have to recognize what their contribution is to global emissions. The reduction to get to net zero, I think, must be an objective of all boards. And I think that's probably the climate issue is the one that's probably going to influence people more and more in the years to come. That's the first one. And the second one, I think, will be recognizing that boards need to be more diverse, that there is still a majority of men, still a majority of white men sitting on boards, and certainly a majority of white men of a certain age sitting on boards. I think there needs to be an increasing amount of diversity in the boardroom. So those are the two main issues that I think I would focus on at the moment.
Very good. Thank you, Denise. Risto, which are the concerns that you have and the major issues in the agenda that you would like to emphasize?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Denise that let's first make sure that our children will have a world to live in. If we fail in that, everything else really doesn't matter at all. Yeah. And one concept that I really like that sort of helps in this is to think about the net impact of the company we work for. So not just the other side of the sort of the equation, the negative things we cause for the world around us, but also taking into account the positive things that our products and services cause. And there's a very interesting sort of a business, but a business that aims to save the world called Upright Project, which has created a machine learning model that tries to calculate the net impact of all businesses of which there's enough information and scientific research available on the internet. So please take a look at Upright Project, just Google it. It's highly interesting. And then the second thing I want to mention is, I talked about complexity earlier. It provides a huge opportunity for those that can have the foresight or insight to understand something fundamental a little bit earlier than others. And as an example, in 2008, we all knew, or most of us at least knew enough about technology development that we could have predicted the birth of an industry that at the moment has a turnover of maybe 350, 400 billion a year, but didn't exist at all just 12 years ago. And I think many of you are struggling to figure out what is this huge industry that was born in this brief time. It's the cloud services industry. And actually the technology drivers for the cloud services are in hindsight completely obvious. But I didn't think of them back then. And many of you didn't think about them because you are here, not on the Bahamas. But there's something like that happening right now as well. And in hindsight, I'm afraid that it will feel equally obvious. And I hope that I will be smarter this time, and all of us.
Very good, Risto. Thank you very much. Tobías, which priorities or which areas you see as important for boards over the next years?
No, well, fully agree with my colleagues. Also, maybe building on they said earlier, being sure that when we talk about purpose, we are conveying internally and externally that the company is not just serving customers, it's not just creating value for shareholders, it's about society, it's the role of the company beyond of suppliers, shareholders. And maybe the second issue, it's about people, it's about team people, because we are realizing more and more and more that the real competitive advantage is about people. It's our team. This is the real and non-replicable competitive advantage. And we have to integrate younger people. We have to take care of, to understand the new kind of jobs, even in the new digital society, which maybe 30% of the existing are not today in place. And it's a great challenge also for the responsibility of the companies being part of the society. This is maybe to emphasize those kind of concerns.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Denise, Risto, Tobías, for this great session in this process of sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your reflections on what makes boards of directors truly effective institutions of governance, how to think holistically for the long term, how also to think in terms of the wider impact of the company and society, and how to actually keep this investment in people, in making sure that your own people are actually integrated, motivated, and committed to take the company to the next level. We should stop here. Thank you very much, Denise, Risto, Tobías, and please join me in thanking them for the outstanding performance and actually the outstanding behavior as well as board directors, CEOs, and chairmen of boards. Thank you very much.